right. I am live on Instagram, on TikTok, and on Facebook, LinkedIn, and Twitter. Some of my favorite places to hang out on social media. Twitter's been interesting the last few weeks, but it's still there, still hanging out there. So that's good. I wonder if StreamYard can stream to Mastodon. I bet it can't. Doesn't matter. Who knows? We are all looking into new places to go, but so far Twitter's still hanging in there. So, welcome, welcome, welcome. I am excited to talk with you live tonight. And if you are on the replay, then welcome to the replay. You can drop me a message. You can say hello and tell me where you're coming from. And if you're watching on the replay, if you want to tell me when you watched it, that would be awesome too. So, my name is Hadass. I'm a life coach and I'm a wellness advocate and well-being advocate. And I help people age with dignity and vigor. Hello, Lynn. Nice to see you on Instagram. So exciting when I see my friends. So we're thankful for joining. And I wanted to talk about community tonight. And Lynn, I know that is something that you have thoughts on because you're building your own community and it looks really, really awesome and exciting. You're storied human. So it's interesting. I looked up the definition of community because, when you're using a word, it's always a good idea to have some idea of what it means, at least according to the dictionary. Sometimes we need to take words and give them more bigger meanings, but I wanted to start with the dictionary. So the dictionary says about community, let me just check exactly. So it gives two definitions. One is a group of people living in the same place or having a particular characteristic in common. And then it gives us an example, the scientific community. Or we could talk about, for instance, a podcasting community. We can talk about Twitter community. Twitter especially has got a zillion communities. And the really nice thing about Twitter has always been that you can listen in on conversations that community members are having without actually being part of that community. And it's a great way to learn without centering yourself and having to be part of something that maybe you don't belong. So that's a thought. And then the second definition it gives for community, I forget which dictionary it is exactly, but I think it's an American. It says, a feeling of fellowship with others as a result of sharing common attitudes, interests, and goals. And then I find that they have a really interesting example here. They say, the sense of community that organized religion can provide. So that's interesting that that's the choice that they make for community, because of course there's lots of other communities out there. So if I'm just looking around, because I've got several devices going and I want to make sure I get to look at everybody because you guys are my community and I love talking to you. So let's go back to the idea of community. So why do people look for community? It's something that's built really deeply into who we are, into our DNA, if you will, or into our soul, depends what level you want to look at. But community is something that humans really, really look for. And sometimes to their own detriment. And sometimes it's the way, it's what gives us the support. I mean, there's been studies that have shown that social connections, or if you will, community, are very much factor in longevity, for example, that lonely people just don't live as long as people who have a network of friends and family. And you see that sometimes when when some men get older, if they haven't built up a community, then they just kind of wither away and die, and it's sad. Whereas sometimes other people will. Sometimes it can be hard for people to build new friendships when they're older. And of course, as you get older, unfortunately, some of your friends and family kind of fall away. die or they move away or you lose connection. And so it becomes really important to keep those connections going. And it can take an effort. And some people, live all of their lives in the place where they were born. And as far as they're concerned, their community consists of the people they went to kindergarten with, and everybody else is kind of on the periphery. And that's great if that works for them. But nowadays, we are so mobile. Certainly when I was a kid, we moved from place to place because my dad was a scientist and he would go and spend a year here or a year there. And while that was great for us in terms of becoming more cosmopolitan, learning more languages, getting more experiences, it can be hard in terms of feeling like you're part of a community, because if you don't stay in one place, then you have to build a new community wherever you go. And I see that in people like, for instance, military families. They get moved around, and basically everywhere they go, they have to build a new community, or they're the community of, if they get moved together, then it's, then the community that they have built together is part of, becomes their community, and they just basically move around. But, sometimes people will get moved away from their community, and then they have to build something new. And I see people who grew up in military families, or people who are military spouses. This can be an issue. People get lonely, and people, get tired of having to build a new community every few years. And that might be, a reason why some people might want to retire from the military or from any sort of situation where they get moved around a lot. But because it seems to be a really deep human need to have some sort of community. And it can be so there were those two definitions. One is a community of people who maybe share goals or some characteristics. And for example, Jewish community all over the world, we have certain characteristics in common, and we might be connected with each other. I mean, we don't know each other. It can be good, can also be problematic, but at least there's something. But also you see, gamers or queer people, or in general people who have some sort of characteristics that in common, and maybe they like to talk about it, and they'll get together maybe online or in person and spend time together. But the thing about the feeling of community, which was the second definition, I think is more interesting, because you can form a community, like a scientific community or a surfers community or a gamers community or whatever, streamers, runners. It's the thing that you have in common that holds you together. For example, if you don't no longer have that thing, then you might not feel part of that community anymore, unless you've built some other reasons to stick around there. Like, for example, for 18 years, my kids went to a certain school, and that was part of that community. And now my youngest graduated a couple of years ago. And while I still support the school and I love hearing what's going on there and so on, I don't feel like I'm really part of that community anymore, because I don't have school-age children, which at this point, given what's going on with flu and RSV and strep and God knows what, I am devoutly grateful that I don't have school-age children, and I'm sending strength and love to everyone who does. So there are certain communities that we can be part of for a season, maybe, of our life. It might be, as children, we might be part of a youth group. As people go through school, and then they're part of that community, and then maybe they move on, maybe they move away, they go to different maybe post-secondary or different jobs, and they lose connection with the community that they had. And then it becomes important to build a new community. Because if you look back to how humans evolved, we were hunter-gatherers. And, that's where we started. We were hunter-gatherers, and we were small bands of, We were small bands of groups, tribes, families, clans, whatever you want to call it. It's amazing how many words the English language has for a small group of people who are connected together. So that's kind of interesting as well. So you have these groups of people who are connected for whatever reason, and very often it might be that they are physically related, biologically related. Like if you have cousins and aunts and uncles and family and so on. I mean, once upon a time, people lived, in the same village with their families, and that's who their community was. And they didn't need to look for community; they were born into it. I remember there was a story in the Bible about the prophet Elisha, and he goes to visit this woman. She's very wealthy, and she makes like a little room for him. And anytime he's a prophet, and anytime he goes to that city, she invites him to come and eat and sleep and so on. And so he's grateful for her generosity, and he says to her, "What can I do for you in return?" And he says, "Can I speak for you to the king or the generals or whatever?" Because I guess he's well connected. And she says, "I sit within my people." That's a literal translation. Like, I live within my community. She doesn't need him to speak to the king or the generals because she's got her community that supports her. In the end, he promises her a child, and then she has a child, and then the child gets sunstroke, and then the prophet appears to die, and then the prophet comes back and brings her back to life, and so on. It's a whole story. But I was always struck by that one simple line. She refuses his offer to speak to the higher ups, to the king, to the generals, to the people who have power. She doesn't need him to speak to them for her because she has the power of her community. She's within her community. If she needs anything, she can find it within her community, or the people of her community will help her get it. She doesn't need his intercession as an outsider. And I've always found that really, really striking, that particular line. And I've always felt a little jealous because, I said, my father was a scientist, and it's mostly based in one place. I mean, it's not like we moved every year like a military family, but we did do a fair amount of moving around. And like, I grew up in one country, and then I spent early childhood in one country, and then the rest in a different country, and then back and forth, and a year here and a year there. And it's like, and then when I was 20, I left the country of my birth and went to live in a different country, and ended up, like, I've been here in Winnipeg for almost 30 years, and that's the longest I've ever lived in one place, ever. And for my kids, it's kind of the opposite. They came home from the hospital to this house that my spouse and I still live in. So it's a very different situation, for sure. But the whole need for community is a very deep human thing. And that's part of what made the pandemic so hard for so many of us, is because we felt cut off from our community. Now, thankfully, we have the internet. Like I said, here I am on all these social media talking away, and people can hear me and can answer me. And so we can build, community right here on the internet, on social media. And that is a gift. Absolutely. It doesn't always fulfill all of our needs. And that's why it's important that we've started to see people again in person, although given what's going on with flu and RSV and so on, as well as COVID, it's important that we keep an eye on that. But, TikTok is telling me stuff about community guidelines, which is kind of funny given that I'm talking about community. So communities need guidelines, for sure. I mean, one community that I've really been enjoying lately is Svara, which calls itself a traditionally radical yeshiva. and with a real emphasis on support for queer and disabled people. And the community guidelines are very clear that, to try and prevent harm and against ableism and bigotry and so on. And so I've really been doing a lot of thinking about what kind of communities we create. I mean, very often, I think communities are created kind of not on purpose. A bunch of people who have, like I say, a certain interest. Maybe it's in a particular TV show, or maybe it's in some sort of maybe sexual orientation of some kind, or maybe their kids go to the same school, or maybe they go to the same synagogue or church, and there's various ways that people can connect with each other, and like I said, it's not always intentional. The idea of an intentional community is a whole different thing, in the sense that it's something that is created with the intention of thinking about how people come together, how people create community, how people can support each other, and how people can feel love for each other. Because really, that is the purpose of community. Really, is for us to feel love. And even if it's something that's like, I don't know, the scientific community, it's not obviously based on love, but I mean, it is what it comes down to, because people want respect and they want to be appreciated. And in a professional setting, people don't always explicitly talk about loving their colleagues, and maybe sometimes they don't. But there's still some sort of undercurrent of mutual appreciation and respect that needs to happen, or you don't have a community. So I would love to know what you think about communities and what kind of community you like to see. I mean, we can create communities. We have the internet, we have the world, we have the ability to speak to each other and to create the kind of communities that we want to see, as, for example, Svara has done by setting up these community guidelines, which are very, very specific, like respecting pronouns and, being some confidentiality, and also with a channel for reporting any sort of harm that or pain that somebody might have undergone, and letting the organizers know so that they can take steps to try and make it better. So anyway, that was my little talk about community this evening. I hope you like it. I would love to know what you think. I would love to have you drop me a message, whether it's a tweet or a comment or whatever it is, on any kind of the many platforms that I'm on right now. And this will also go on YouTube later. So I would love to know what you think about community, and what kind of communities you think are important and should be encouraged. Because, like I said, communities come and go and grow and break up and disappear, and sometimes it is just for a season. This is that people come into our life for a reason. Sometimes it's for a season. I don't remember how it goes, but it's important to be aware of the kind of communities that we build and what they're based on, and whether they are helpful or possibly harmful. Sometimes communities can devolve into bullying, into gatekeeping, into into causing harm to others. So anyway, like I said, I would love to hear from you. You have a great evening, and I'll talk to you again next week. Love you. Bye. Let's see. And now. And now. And broadcast. Have a good evening.